Hi, my name is Tobias Latzke from Base58, and I'm excited to have Gordon Einstein next to me to answer some questions about tokenization and legal aspects of it. Gordon, I would like to start with a personal introduction. What's your background? What was your path to crypto? What makes you excited about it?
So I'm a lawyer from the United States, licensed in California. Now, when I first started practicing law, there was no crypto, there were no tokens, any of that stuff. That was, I think, before everyone on the planet was born. And then, strangely enough, in connection with running my subsequent cloud computing company, I met a couple that was one of the two founders of the biggest blockchain development house in Ukraine. They co-founded Distributed Lab. I met them. I've always had a love for the Russian language. And because of them, I ended up in Kiev and Ukraine and Odessa a solid 15 times. And all their friends are into crypto. And I didn't know what the heck these people were talking about. But I was just happy being in Ukraine, drinking vodka, having salo, all that other good stuff. Pretty recently, I went there and something clicked in me. I think what clicked was I realized that this area needed law. Yeah. And I just did a crash course on getting myself completely up to speed on the technicalities of it. Now, I have a programming or development background. I run a cloud computing company that's related to law. So I wasn't starting from zero. And I had been in this environment before, but I realized that law needs to rise up and meet crypto, and crypto needs to rise up and meet law. They need to come together and live happily.
Absolutely.
So I got motivated to learn everything about this area.
Yeah, so this is one reason why this conference is started, the Crypto Asset Conference here in Frankfurt. Do you like it so far?
I love it on many levels. It's been a great conference, fantastic speakers, very well organized, very well put together. Everyone's hospitable, they know what they're talking about. I enjoyed being the opening keynote, that was special for me. It's also very special for me because I studied in Germany twice when I was in college, in Augsburg and Berlin. And that was just a fantastic time in my life that I remember very fondly. And I have not been back to Germany other than passing through an airport for 25 years. This is my first time back and this conference let me do it. So, yeah, ist ausgezeichnet.
Also sprechen wir auf Deutsch weiter, kein Thema.
Bitte nicht. Bitte nicht.
Okay, yeah, referring to your keynote, yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a great talk, and the title was Liberating Crypto Assets. I shortened it a little bit.
A little.
So, what has to be liberated about crypto assets?
So, I've given so many presentations around the world on the subject of initial coin offerings again and again and again. How to do them legally, how to not do them legally and get yourself into trouble, like what not to do, like don't commit fraud. I don't think it's scary how many times I have to say that. But there's a fundamental point that I think needs to be acknowledged, which is crypto assets, which is, by the way, part of why this conference is so great. Crypto assets are a whole new thing. They're a whole new kind of object. They're not what's happened before. They're evocative of what happened before. They're based to a certain extent on what happened before. But sometimes when you combine things in a new way and add other new things, you get emergent properties that never before existed. Just like blockchain never existed before. It's based on an accounting ledger, but it's not an accounting ledger. So it's a natural instinct on the part of regulators and the part of everyone, and I understand and I empathize, to try to apply the older models to the newer thing. It's normal, it's human, it's not that they're bad. But we just need to acknowledge at least the possibility that this is new. It's not that law doesn't apply, it's not people can commit crimes, we're not saying anarchy, but you need to update the law when things are new. When the internet came out, the old telegram laws, whatever you want to call it, or telephone laws, they try to apply those, it doesn't work. Yeah. Okay, you can't spam telephone calls the way you can on the internet, it just doesn't work to directly apply. So these new things, you need at least a lot to be updated to understand these new things. But it goes beyond that. These new things, these crypto assets, have the ability to unleash growth and development and even justice at a huge speed. Not only because they're amazing, but because they're building on every platform that happened before. Everything that happens before got us to now. So if we can set up a regulatory structure that allows them and empowers them, we can accomplish a lot as humanity, and also each country can. Now, one thing I also want to emphasize is these are inherently global assets in the sense that they do not know geography. Yeah. They do not know geography in a way that even email doesn't know geography. I mean, we still have domain names that end in country names. Like, these assets, they're just electrons that will naturally or natively flow wherever they want to. And they have to be empowered and constrained on a global level. Like, I don't want to empower global money laundering. I want to be against global money laundering. It's not a good thing. I don't want to empower terrorist financing. I want to restrain terrorist financing. Well, crypto assets, like every other technology on the planet, can be used for good, evil, or neutral. And I want to enhance their positives and control their negatives. So that requires a global approach. So that's what I'm thrilled to be talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So, yeah, for getting started, this do no harm approach we see now in the US.
Well, let me jump in. First of all, you should always obey the law. But just in terms of actions in life, the idea that we don't do harm is, I'd say, not the whole story. It's do no harm that's in excess of the good that you produce. Okay, so chemotherapy to cure cancer may cause harm, but give me the chemotherapy, please. All right, driving a certain speed, may cause harm, or driving slowly may cause harm in that I may be late or delayed. But if it stops an accident, great. So, like, when people point out, oh, you can use crypto assets for money laundering, I'm like, well, you can use cash for money laundering too. And if your test was really do no harm, then you eliminate cash. You can use credit cards for money laundering. You have to look at the holistic picture. Now, you also have to respect the laws of your country and your world, and do no legal harm. That's forbidden. But in terms of evaluating technology, you have to just be an adult and look at the pros and cons and try to decide how to manage it. Now, with respect to the US and some other jurisdictions, the ICOs, crypto, I mean, there's a lot of topics there. To come down hard on them when we don't fully understand them and just say, hold on, wait, we're scared, which I think is the attitude of some parties, causes harm. And actually, I think is damaging. I'm very happy to be a citizen of the world. I'm happy to be in Germany. I'm happy to be in Ukraine. Like, I love these places. I love. And like I said, my joy in studying in Germany has been amazing. My time in Ukraine has been amazing. These are like second and third homes. I won't even rank them. But just as an American person, when I see us not embracing the future like we should, I'm not saying be starry-eyed and crazy about it, but not being open to it as maybe as we could, I feel that we're causing national harm. Like, we're causing harm to the prospects of a country I care about and not doing what we can. And I really admire and appreciate countries that take a more proactive approach, and I'm trying to get us to do that back in the US also. There's things you can do, like a regulatory sandbox. Again, I acknowledge the concerns. They are real. Okay, they are real. I'm not pretending they're not. And I really get annoyed with people who misuse this technology for bad, because it makes people like me have a harder time. But Estonia has a great idea with their regulatory sandbox. If you have some wild new creature that you've created, you don't necessarily want to release it into the wild, because once those genes are out, they're out. But you can have a sandbox. You can have a lab, with really strong walls, where you test this thing and you go, okay, this is good, this is bad. We're going to tweak it this way, blah 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 blah. And then gradually you expand the sandbox and you let the world have it. And it's not like, I mean, crypto assets compared to viral technology and biology, it is not made for evil, it's made for good. Yeah. So, that's a perfectly good approach. Gibraltar, with its blockchain exchange, they're quite intelligent. They're coming up with a series of thought-out regulations for ICOs that drive people in a good way to work with local sponsors, and then bridge the gap immediately between a compliant ICO and getting listed on the exchange. And the rest of the world is struggling with that. They're pretty clever. So, like I said, these are global assets. And the neat thing is, you can grab a little bit of DNA from here, a little bit of DNA, you can take Lego blocks from around the world, and everyone's innovating all the time, and build the perfect system. And I also think there's going to be a convergence of rules as people do that. So we're beginning to see the starts of global law, which makes me excited.
Yeah, really. Yeah, yeah, far from, yeah, you said it, most countries aren't or are lagging behind with the regulation. Nevertheless, ICOs are incredibly successful, recently overtaken traditional venture capital mechanisms. Do you think it's especially because of the lack of regulation, or what makes ICOs so successful at the moment?
I think it was in part, I think there was always regulation, just people weren't following it. Okay, and that's, I don't know whether I'm sympathetic or unsympathetic to that point of view, because when something's totally new, you don't necessarily connect all the dots. From my mind, so the definition of a security in the United States, if it's not defined in some other category, is it's an investment contract. That word, that term, is used in our two core pieces of legislation, which is the 33 Act and the 34 Act. Those two laws form the basis of U.S. securities law. And if something's not, if it's not clear if something's a security, if it's not like a stock or a bond or whatever, you look to see whether it's an investment contract. And the case that the whole world is talking about is a 1946 U.S. Supreme Court case called the Howey case. Howey, H-O-W-E-Y. And from the Howey case, you have the Howey test. And what the U.S. court system does is, if it's not sure if something's a security or not a security, it applies the Howey test. And if it passes every prong, it's a security. You know, investment of money, common enterprise, all that usual stuff. I talk about it endlessly in my presentations. So it was immediately obvious to me that these tokens, just like anything else on the planet, may pass the Howey test and could be securities. And the SEC, quite correctly, when they issued their report on the Dow, I think it was last year, July 25th, 2017, I forget the exact date, they pointed out, hey, securities law applies here. And the Dow, by the way, would have been found to be a security if it didn't explode. So, watch it, you kids. And you know what? They're 100% right. They are 100% right. It is a security. Okay? And it needs some level of regulation. Now, but notice what they didn't say. They didn't say Ethereum is a security, and they didn't touch Bitcoin at all. Now, why isn't it Ethereum a security? I mean, they, Vitalik took in crypto and issued these Ethereum tokens, but yet the platform was being built. So, I mean, I'm kind of giving you a wandering answer, but the, regulation empowers, and it can also hold back. And there's, rather than taking the position, there needs to be a constant conversation happening, because the regulation is supposed to empower humanity. So we'll see where it goes. I want to push it a certain direction, though.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of about tokenization, and there are different forms of where tokens derive their value from. Do you see specific trends this year or next year in tokenization?
100%. So I'll make a preliminary point, which is the blockchain as a technology does not require tokenization. Blockchain itself is just a form of database. It's a really excellent database that addresses certain issues that arise in certain use cases, like distributed trust or distributed non-trust. At the moment, blockchain is obviously kind of slow because we're all doing proof of work to try to prove it out. So blockchain doesn't require tokenization. Now, when you add tokens to a blockchain economy, ecology, however you want to say it, platform, it's not necessarily the case that they're exchangeable. For example, you can have a token that represents your identity. I don't want my identity traded, even if the platform makes good use of that token. It's like, no, that's my token. And it is not fungible, it's not tradable, and, don't trade my identity around. Now, but that's not always the case, obviously. You can have exchangeable tokens. The next question is, do you exchange them for value, or are they just freely exchangeable? And then another question is, do you issue them through ICO? Because you don't need to do ICO. You can airdrop them, you can do distribute to developers, you can do whatever you want to do. So now let's kind of go to tokens that are worth something. There's a whole variety, a zoo filled of tokens. And FINMA, the Swiss regulatory agency, just defined 3 broad categories that I can actually tease out a little bit more. They talked about there's currency or payment tokens that in essence act as money. Now, unless you're an insane regulator, you're going to feel that those aren't securities. Your concerns are going to be more along the lines of money laundering, know your customer, terrorist financing, all those other things. FINMA also said there's tokens that they call them asset tokens. that represents some underlying value or thing, like one that could represent gold, for example. And again, they're trying to keep it short. I understand these are proxies for much bigger ideas. And then they pointed out, utility tokens, which allow you to use a platform that's been built. And they're saying these have law that apply to them, but they're not money per se, and they're not securities per se, so something else applies. And then they sort of backed into the issue that the United States is wrestling with right now, which is just going to change the destination of humanity, I think. And the idea is, if you're raising money to build a platform that's not yet built, that's going to use tokens, and the tokens will be utility tokens on the platform once built, for the period when you're raising money and before it's built, are the token securities during that period?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe. Maybe. God bless maybe, because it's really messing everyone up right now. Yeah. So what happens is this attorney named Marco Santori or something, I think it's Santori, who was at the Cooley firm at the time and has now left, put out a paper there where he articulated this position. He said, we're not sure we're right, but this is what it looks like. He said, if you're building this kind of platform, these tokens are likely or maybe found to be securities during this build period. And here's the way you get around it. You issue something called a SAFT.
Sorry?
SAFT, Simple Agreement for Future Tokens. Okay. SAFTs. A SAFT is built on something called a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity. Of course, nothing's ever simple. That's like lawyer for we're not going to charge you a lot in the beginning. So a SAFT, he said, rather than issue tokens in the beginning to provide the capital with which to build the platform and be worried that those tokens are securities, issue instead these SAFEs. I'm sorry, SAFs. See, I'm doing it myself. Issue these SAFs. These SAFs themselves are securities. They are. Issue them only pursuant to a proper exemption from registration, for example, in the United States, to accredited investors. And then once the platform is built, only then convert the SAFs, which are securities, into utility tokens, which aren't. Now, it is not necessarily the case that his analysis is right. And I personally think there's big flaws in it. There's actually something called the anti-SAFT project that is now at Cardozo Law School. Well, the problem is, Cooley's a big firm, it's very prestigious, and it works with large clients, it works with governments. It's a great firm, but they have a certain set of economic interests and a certain place in the market, and a certain need to be conservative and to be perceived as conservative. And that's not them personally. It's if I was that size, I'd be conservative too. Yeah. So it's not their personalities. But when a firm like that speaks, everyone starts sort of buying into it, and the SEC seems to have bought into that point of view, especially when they stopped a company called Munchie from issuing their tokens. They did something unusual, which I thought was actually kind of cool of them. They saw a company that was not committing fraud, was legit, that was raising money to build a platform, and were selling tokens in order to build a platform. And under the SAFT concept, those would be securities at the time. And they didn't come in with the black helicopters. They didn't arrest them in the middle of the night. They didn't stick them on a newspaper. They called them up and said, stop. Okay, you never hear about, hey, dear person, we hear you're going to rob a liquor store tomorrow. Would you mind not doing that? You never hear about that. Yeah. But the SEC, I have to respect them for doing that. They're treading, not lightly, not heavily, but moderately. Yeah. They're only stopping, so far as I can see, they're only stopping offerings that are clearly fraud or that are premature in the sense that a platform has not been built. But what they've also done is they've kind of jawboned up the idea that every ICO is an IPO, which is inherently and clearly provably wrong. Yeah. It is wrong. Okay, it is flat out wrong, because if you're selling tokens that are currencies or payments, right from the beginning it's wrong, because they can't be securities. No. I mean, just logically they can't. They're either commodities or money or currency. Okay, there's no efforts of others at that point. It's just a platform. But I think they're jawboning for the benefit of the public and maybe for some congressional pressure. But their actual actions have been kind of moderate right now. But there's a chilling effect on the market, because if everyone is worried that every ICO is going to be characterized as an IPO, whether or not that's right or wrong, it makes guys like me and people I work with, cautious and scared. Yeah, sure. And I'd say to the SEC and everyone else, just be clear. Be clear so we can either argue with you or be clear so we can agree with you. But when you make these broad generalized statements that are wrong, but you don't act accordingly, And it's kind of hard to deal with. It's kind of hard to deal with. Meanwhile, you got countries that are putting in legislation that works, and all that business is going to flow there.
Yeah, interesting.
It's fun stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it lets me travel the world and come to beautiful Frankfurt and, you know, spreche auf Deutsch a little bit. Don't test me. Yeah.
Okay, maybe as a final question, which country or international institution would you see adopt ICO or cryptocurrency first or most impactful?
There's a dynamic at work which I wish wasn't at work, but it's the way things are right now, which is the larger, more stable economies with long histories, with seriously established or concretely established law, aren't in any rush to adopt, because why should they? You know, the U.S. dollar, for better or for worse, is the global currency right now. You know, China has its need to control capital flows. You know, the EU has enough issues with the euro, and you know, what the heck is? I think it's got a full plate right now. You know, and I don't think England wants to get too nervous with the pound if they're doing Brexit. Mm-hmm. So all these large established economies, you know, they're gonna have to get nudged. What you're seeing is smaller economies or sort of offshoring type locations. Gibraltar, Singapore, Zug, which is acting on its content status. Mm-hmm. You know, the Cayman Islands, Puerto Rico, which has a sort of interesting place in the U.S. legal system because it's kind of in, kind of out. You're seeing what I call these edge zones play with it, but that's also kind of their traditional role. They act as an edge zone when it comes to international business corporations and tax and estate planning and asset protection and all this kind of stuff. It's a little, sometimes it's shady, sometimes it's not. I think they should really avoid being shady to do this right, but you know, the world's a full big place.
So this is our sandbox at large scale.
They kind of, that's actually a beautiful comment. They're acting as a global sandbox. Now what happens is slightly less small economies are beginning to take this on, usually out of a sense of crisis. So Venezuela is throwing out the petro or something. You know, I'm not going to Venezuela. God bless Venezuela. I'm not going there anytime soon because I want to live. You know, I hope they stabilize. I hope they pull it together. But it's, you know, it's reasonably clever. I mean, if that lets them escape from their own monetary policy, you know, great. But then they're going to have to stop inflating and printing cash to keep the population happy, and they're in trouble. But that's, you know, they're got their backs up against the wall, so they're doing this. Belarus, you know, is just legalized everything. You know, ICOs, crypto, smart contracts. They have better prospects, I'd argue, because they're like Ukraine. They're situated between two civilizational poles, you know, EU and Russia, and they're got enough talent in the country and around the country that whatever the governance issues are in Belarus, something could happen, you know, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to bubble. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you have, you know, in the U.S. and everywhere else, everyone respectable is like, whoa, we don't approve of crypto. That's scary, but we approve of blockchain, which is basically my way of saying you want to look cool. You know, you're kind of with the hip kids, but you're not really going there. Okay, and then you know, yes, crypto has been used for shady purposes. Part of the reason it's used for shady purposes because the regulators need to get their act together and allow it to not be used for shady purposes. I mean, you can take a fork and a knife and only make it usable for shady purposes, and everyone will be like, oh, I'm going to stick with spoons because forks and knives are evil. Well, it's like, no, legalize a fork and a knife and then regulate forks and knives. Yeah. Then we can all like eat like normal people. So it's a little bit of a rant, but the world needs to get in alignment with this stuff. Look, Gibraltar's great. I've been there. You know, I know the developers of the blockchain exchange. I don't want every U.S. ICO running over to Gibraltar. I want them ICOing in the U.S. And the comment I make about Germany is, you know, I think, you know, this is the home of the Enlightenment. This is the home of engineering and science. This is, you know, civilization personified. I mean, Germany's great, you know, and so, and it's, you know, methodical and thoughtful and documented, and, you know, has engineering skills that the rest of the world just, you know, cries to get. So it should be at the lead of blockchain development. It should be at the lead of the stuff. I'm not saying go crazy with the financial part, but when it comes to the technical development of it, when it comes to implementing it, I mean, I like to see Deutsche Bank, they have a fintech lab. I would like them to just own blockchain. Yeah. Okay, you know, and stop being a dreadnought, start being a space shuttle. Okay, because it's time. I mean, this is the place. There's so much capital and talent here. I mean, I'm glad this conference is here.
Cool.
Cool.
Gordon,
Wunderbar.
thank you. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.